Hey there, my name is Marla McKenzie. I am head of operations at Catalysr, and I'm joined today by the lovely, amazing Rai, who is both the GM of SquirrelStreet.com and also an entrepreneur in residence for Catalysr, and she's worked with us over the last couple of years and mentored a bunch of our alumni. I'm sure many of you recognize her. Thanks for being here, Rai.
My pleasure.
It's mine.
Represent.
But today, you've just done us, graced us with your presence and your knowledge on MVPs and how to plan and build MVPs. And I think, that's something that we've talked about a lot. And, working with the past cohorts, with the program, and, with all the founders and stuff like that. And I feel like it's a sensitive topic for people like you and me that are on this side of the startup journey. So I mean, let's talk about it. Let's be honest.
It's the hardest concept to get across to a new entrepreneur, believe it or not. They don't understand why you need to pare it down, even though it seems really obvious and maybe obvious in retrospect for us. It's really hard to convince someone to let go of the grand idea and start at the MVP stage. Yeah. There's always a lot of resistance to it, I find. But the good news is that once they get down that path, once they start on it, it starts making sense. Yeah. So, it's just that original resistance of, I've got this giant idea, this is how I'm going to take over the world, and now I have to park it and sort of take it apart and make it work. It's also confronting because you have to make it work. Yeah. Right? You don't have, the luxury of 2 years and a marketing budget. You have to,
and millions of dollars.
Correct.
And a dev team.
Yeah. You have to take that first step. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, myself included, right? I've had plenty of ideas that I've never actioned because I've always thought of them theoretically but never taken the first step, and the first step is actually that MVP.
The hardest.
It's the hardest.
I mean, I agree, especially when you say in retrospect for us, because I'm the same way, and I'm not a founder myself, but I do definitely get very excited about things we're doing at Catalysr, right? And so I'm like, we're going to do this demo day, and I think I told you last year as well, I was like, I want to stream it simultaneously on YouTube, on Twitter, on this one, on that, on Instagram. I want to stream it everywhere. So, you can watch it anywhere, and there'll be thousands of people watching it. And then when it came to it, it's I couldn't get it to stream. I couldn't get it to stream on YouTube. Never mind, these 5 or 6 different platforms. And,
I remember that panic. I remember that.
Yeah. Yep. And so it's just, I think it applies in lots of different scenarios, but kind of coming back to it being, I think, one of the hardest things to convey. I think, well, I'll ask you a question first, and then I want to see what your thoughts are. But do you think when part of that hardship of moving away from the dream, right, from the dream platform, the dream solution, do you think that being in love with the solution is a contributor to that kind of almost a bit of denial, if you will, almost that bit of kind of resistance to really kind of tearing the idea back to its very basic core functionality for a minimum viable product? Yeah.
There is a bit of that. And my instincts, though, are that more than that, it's getting in front of the customer before you're ready, right? So if you had this grand idea, you probably had a grand plan of how you were going to get there, right? You were going to build this beautiful thing. You were going to, while building it, somehow collect some customers. Maybe you would have done an invite-only thing. There would have been some buzz. You see it play out in tech media, especially or on Twitter, and you go, that's how I'm going to do my thing. And then you're getting in front of a customer. With the MVP, we give you 2 weeks. And then you have to be in front of your customer. Yeah. And it's not the pretty thing, because an MVP is not pretty. It's not meant to be pretty.
Yeah, it should be embarrassing.
Correct.
That's what a lot of people say, yeah.
And so, you're putting yourself out there firstly, yeah, you have to be vulnerable, but you're putting not your best foot forward in a sense.
Yeah.
Right? And I think, and I know for myself, I'm really conscious of that I'm going to put this out there. People are going to look at it and they're going to be like, what is this?
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, but it's also knowing that, oh, I'm starting to sell in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Who thinks of sales when they're thinking of their grand idea? No one.
Yeah.
Right? You think of branding, you think of being a CEO, you think of making the money. Who thinks of, oh, I'll be selling, and I'll be selling from day dot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's actually the bigger thing, that getting in front of customers and having that conversation
makes it real.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that as well. You know, it was funny because just last night I was having this conversation with someone who's in our current cohort, and I think her idea is great. You know, frankly, I was like, girl, I'd use that. Like, I love that idea type thing. And we were kind of talking about this, a little bit about that and whatever. And she was talking about, so I asked her, you know, where's your MVP at? Like, are you scoping? Are you planning? Are you, you know, are you building it yet? Like, what's the deal type thing? And she said, yeah, I'm actually like, I'm almost done. And she shows me this like big, like lean model canvas that she had on her wall, and it was full of all the post-its, and I was like, wow, girl, right, you've been, you know, good for you. Like, clearly you've, you know, really kind of laid out all of your assumptions here. And she was like, yeah, my last thing is I just need to figure out whether the purchases should be in app, or if we can, if we can, you know, have like a little pop-up or this or that, whatever. And I was like, that's the last thing you're trying to figure out? And I was like, forget it, absolutely forget it. And the look on her face, she was kind of like, well, excuse me, type thing. And I was like, listen, you know, and you know, tell me how valid you think this analogy is. But I said, like, right now you're standing at the bottom of the mountain, right? Like, and you're looking at this mountain, and you're, you know, like you're discussing what you're going to do when you get to the top of the ladder, like to the top of the mountain. You don't need to worry about that at all. All you should be worrying about is starting to build a ladder, basically. Like, literally, you need your 2 sticks and you need your third stick, step on it, and then see where you can find another stick. Like, just kind of keep going. Just, you know, yeah, basically stop worrying about what's going to happen in the end, because ultimately, and you touched on this as well in the masterclass, is like, ultimately your end product is going to be very different from what you imagined it, because it comes down to what the market wants, right?
Yeah. And it goes as well with what you were saying about sort of distancing yourself from that grand idea. It's all of that, right? So it's understanding that where you are now is 100% not going to be where you will be at the end of the journey. The journey never ends, but you know, say 5 years from now. But it's also making peace with the fact that you may actually take a few blind steps, and maybe you find the 2 sticks and then you can't go any further, right? And so then you have a 1-step ladder, right?
Yeah. And you need to accept that it's only going to be a 1-step ladder.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. I think we don't really. And you almost can't, like when you have an idea and you're planning a business, you can't plan for failure. You have to plan for success. But an MVP can very quickly bring up, oh no, this is not going to work. What next? And a lot of times, like, in a way, we are not prepared for it because we've never done it before. But it's usually not obvious that how you will pivot, or if you could pivot. You've got the grand idea, you don't know where you're starting. Clearly, you don't know what that journey is going to be, right? So breaking that up, and so kind of like, if I put everything in there, then I can control as much of the journey and the steps. If I put in as many, you know, step ladders, the higher I will go. Well, yeah, okay, maybe you'll have a more built product, a more complete product. But will you have customers, and will you have income, and will you have profit? Those are the unknowns. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And to be fair, it's funny, but you can't actually build a business any other way.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have to break it up. You know, I like to, actually there's a graph that I love to pull out. It's on the internet somewhere. It's an Apple graph, and usually when you look at Apple stock prices, it's a graph that starts in like the early 90s, and it's like that. But there's a different graph that sort of goes beyond that in the late 70s, 80s, and it's nothing. It's just, and then it goes up, right?
Yeah.
It's really hard to convey that that's where you are, and that's how long it would take.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, you bring up a good point just now, which is spending a lot of money on an MVP. So there's the wanting it to be perfect, or at the very least like nice, right? But then there's also the wanting it to be complex and perhaps even legitimate in some ways, and achieving that by way of, you know, just straight up hiring a developer and just doing something. You know, I know that you have some very strong feelings on that, as do I. But, you know, cheap MVPs, right?
Yep.
Cheap, and let's use the example of like software or services that are, you know, enabled or facilitated by software, for example. You know, this is something that I think we feel very similar on, right? Which is just build a one-page website. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, for the love of God, just build a one-page website. I'm begging you, you know? Like, how do you...
Put it out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think because we aren't prepared for failure, we don't think in those terms. So we think if we spend a lot of time and money and we make something amazing, it will be loved. We never think of, well, if we actually spend more and shorten that cycle of getting feedback from our customers and start acquiring customers at the start, if we fail, we lose less. And that's not something you think about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But that is the point of an MVP, is to get you in front of your customer really quickly, so that you validate your idea, so that if you are already spending, that you spend less in the long term, that you're not wasting money. Spend is okay, that you're not wasting money. Right? Yeah, and cheap is good, especially at a startup with no funding or little funding. Why not spend as little time and money and effort required to collect as many customers as you can than the other way around?
And as much data as well, like,
Correct.
and understanding as well of how your solution is received, I guess, as well, right? Yeah.
It's a win-win-win, right?
Yeah, I think it's just it's a very kind of hard pill to swallow.
It is.
When you're in love with the idea of streaming on, you know, seven platforms simultaneously, and then realize you're just stuck with one type thing because you couldn't make it work. But yeah, I think
we tend to think that success is in numbers.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the other thing about sort of detaching yourself from the big idea. The big idea is attached to numbers. It's attached to how long the business has been running. It's attached to how much money you've put in. It's attached to how many customers you have, how much money you will then make, right? If you can save yourself that grief almost, and sort of just go, what can I learn really quickly about my business, and how can I really quickly accumulate customers now? And it may not be the 100,000, the million customers you're thinking of back then. But if you have like 5 customers that are really happy with you, that are willing to sign up on a subscription plan with your crappy product right now, right? Then you know you're onto something. Like that should actually give you a massive sense of confidence.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, it's almost, it's a strange, it's just really, it's very against how we kind of grow up and see the world and are taught to build things and build businesses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, another thing is I think we don't, I don't think we realize as well as just as like normal day-to-day consumers, as just normal day-to-day people, I don't think we realize how many products and services are actually MVPs as well. Right? So I think I remember I attended this like panel or presentation, I can't recall, but it was an event where this lady, this female founder, was telling us the story of how she founded her business, It was a cleaning business. And then, subsequently built it over the years, acquired another company and exited and sold it. And she was, living the life, basically. But she said that, so effectively it was a cleaning service, right? So you went online, you could sign up, you can get someone to come to your house and clean it on a weekly basis, monthly basis, however long, right? And she said that for a couple of years, it was just a really fancy website, but they were manually processing everything in the background, right? So it was almost like this screen, this smoke screen, and then there were people running on a treadmill behind it, basically to keep the lights on type thing.
Yep.
So they would receive a booking, but then they would go and they would someone would manually receive this booking and then email all their cleaners to see who was available, and then manually send the email back to the customer saying, hey, great, this person's going to be there at this time on this date or whatever, and then but everything was done manually. It was really just that 1 or 2 page website that they had that just took the bookings. And it was like that for years, and it was like that until they got to a point, obviously, of critical mass where they just straight up could not do any of this manually anymore. And they, of course, were making money and had reinvested into their infrastructure and stuff. But then when it also came time for their acquisition, they were like, all right, we can't keep emailing people anymore. We have to actually do this the right way. And I think, for that to have gone on for so long, none of those customers would have known. And another thing is perhaps even, for example, in the case of Catalysr, right? You're very kind of intimately familiar with our process. And I wouldn't go as far as perhaps calling it an MVP now, but I would say that we actively change things all the time. No program is the same. Even the program from last year to this year, significantly different. And it's always based on...
Every program that I've been a part of has been different.
Yeah.
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 From 2017.
Yeah. So it's it's always something different. And I think that there are just so many MVPs out there in the wild that people don't realize.
No, they don't. I think, and to that point that you were saying, what we don't see with, say, the giant corporations like Coke, whatever, Arnott's, is all the products that didn't make it to shelf. Because it died at the validation stage. So they built some prototypes, they had an idea, they tested it, it didn't do well, it was out, right? And so that's why when you get something that comes out into mass market that doesn't work, you'll always find people saying, who thought that was a good idea? Well, it was the validation that told them vanilla Coke was a great idea.
Dude, vanilla Coke was an abomination. So was the coffee one, the Coke coffee or whatever. There's so many bad ones.
Just make Coke. Yeah, but the film industry is a great example of this. What do you call it? The pilots.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah. What series?
Correct. And if you go back in time and watch the pilot of a really successful series, it's terrible, right? But something in that pilot was good enough.
It was just enough.
Correct. To go, yep, let's do this, and then to collect the customer base, the viewer base, and to build on that, right?
Yeah.
A lot of unicorns that we have now were manual for a long time. There's no need for automation until it's actually holding you back.
Yeah.
Right? You only automate when you hit scale, or just before you hit scale, ideally.
It's never before. It's always when you're like, oh my God, I've got 300 tasks to
I cannot do one more manual booking.
Yeah, exactly. It's when you're up at 2 a.m. and you're thinking, Jesus, it's time.
Yeah.
But you know what? You bring up a good point of the things that don't make it to the public view, whether they be products or services or, MVPs, I guess. And you brought up Canva, and I'm glad you did, because Canva originated as a yearbook printing company.
Yes.
And what they were doing was they were going out to these schools basically and offering to print their yearbooks. And then they would be printing them and manually binding them and all this kind of stuff, right? And they would have their whole family doing this.
Their whole house was full of books, right?
Yeah, their whole household was sitting there binding these yearbooks and then going out to deliver them and this and that and whatever. And then from there, if when you look at that and you kind of realize where Canva's at now, where it was always an iteration for them. It was always how do we help people do these things? How can we, help people get better? I mean, I'm not sure if that was their initial hypothesis of getting better yearbooks.
It was a pivot.
Yeah.
It was an iterative finding out of the original business to
Yeah.
go, we're doing a lot of design work. How can we facilitate this so that the school or whoever, the principal, the teachers, whoever it is,
can do it themselves.
Correct. And then that's how then the idea of Canva as we know it now came about, to go, hang on, we're in this age, because Canva's like, what, 10 years old?
Perhaps, around there, I
we're
reckon,
in this age where you can do things in the browser. How can we, instead of using, like, getting everyone to get, what was it, Adobe Photoshop or whatever.
Well, that's another thing, is that it was almost like a gatekeeper situation when it came to design.
Yes.
Like, that was like very kind of kept to not the average Joe, effectively. Like, you had to be trained in Photoshop in order to design anything.
Exactly. And I've heard Mel say this. I was at one of her talks, and she was saying, like, how could we get regular people, to sit at the computers and make this thing pretty without having to download a giant piece of software to learn how to use it. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, exactly that.
And I think they refer to that as democratizing design, I believe, or something along those lines. But so do you think it's a thing where, like, perhaps because you and I are so involved in the local ecosystem, we know that story, right? Like, perhaps we sought it out, or we went to an event where we know that story and we kind of are aware, right, that it's been a long journey with lots of changes, right? But to someone who's just coming into the ecosystem, they only really see those headlines about Canva becoming a double unicorn, or becoming, closing however many hundreds or tens of millions of dollars in a new funding round, or acquiring a new place, or a new organization, or something along those lines. Like, and I think Mel also in a talk that she did that I went to, she referred to highlight reels.
Yes.
And she referred to these as highlight reels. and I think it's so true. It's like she I think her what she was saying was, you can't compare yourself to someone else's highlight reel, which is, it's so true. And I think this is perhaps where part of this I don't want to say confusion, but part of this perhaps maybe resistance, or perhaps fear, I guess, of the MVP as well, is that I think because when you look at the outside of these highlight reels, right, it's a company that has a banging product that's amazing, that's beloved, that is great, that everyone falls in love with, changes the world in some way, shape, or form, right? And then, boom, it's funding after funding after funding. It's billionaire, it's this, it's that. It's a unicorn. It's, available across the world. It's like one of the big tech companies. It's on the ASX. It's like, it's huge, right?
Yeah.
And there seems to be this, like, very kind of, again, highlight reel, this romanticized idea of you just go through the motions, right? You do this, you've got an idea.
You get that, correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that being an MVP is one of those critical steps in those motions, right? Where it's like, oh, at this point it becomes real. Like, now I need to know, like, this is the point where I have to deliver something. And I think a lot of, I know that a lot of founders want to skip that.
They do want to skip that, and they do want to almost write that highlight reel before they've gone through the journey, right? I think, the first thing to remember is, like you said, highlight reels are the thing that comes at the end. But also, every major company, their origin story changes, right? I can't remember which company it was now, but they told a story, like, recently that's not the story they told at a talk that I was at 5 years ago.
Really?
Origin stories change. But if you think about it, the bigger your business is, the more you're changing that origin story into a marketing story. So it's not wrong to change that highlight reel, because you're using it to talk to customers and acquire customers. It will change, right? It's almost in its nature to do so. So that's not wrong. But to think that, to almost either not be aware of or ignore the fact that building a business is a slow, long journey Right?
Yeah.
Like, even the unicorns we have today, they did not get there in a year.
They
did
seem
not
new,
get
but
there
they're
in
10
2
years old, you know?
Correct.
Yeah.
Google's now like, what, 15, 20 years old?
20-something, I
20,
reckon, yeah.
Google's old.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Even Facebook's like 15 years old at this point, I think, if not more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Twitter, yeah. They're all, none of them are startups. We keep calling them startups.
I know.
Yeah, no, it takes about roughly, generally speaking, it takes about 5 years to get to a product that's functional enough for you to mass market. Right?
Yeah.
Imagine if you don't have an MVP and you don't start that learning. You lose out on 5 years of customer acquisition, on 5 years of learning, on 5 years of iteration, because you don't get there on day one.
Yeah.
Right? And if you just didn't do that and you decided to almost waterfall it and build it and then they will come, that's what you're missing out on.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I like that highlight reel. That's a great statement, but that's just not reality. I was going to say something else about something and then I forgot.
Well, about the origin story, right?
Yes.
So I don't think YouTube really flaunts this story very much, right? But like perhaps not in the marketing way because they don't really need to anymore. Like YouTube is way beyond requiring marketing services, I reckon. But they started off as a dating site. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And no one ever, like, that's just when you think about what YouTube is now, it just comes as such a shock. Like, what? What do you mean it was a dating site, right? I think a lot of people often, perhaps a little bit off topic, but everyone seems to think that every kind of life-changing or, big startup originated from, like, two mates that had a problem together and decided to solve it in a garage somewhere. Yeah. And
see, I'm actually quite interested in why that is the case, because pre-tech startups, those stories are still there. It's like, I was looking for this, and then I found paracetamol.
And it's always two dudes as well.
Well, yes.
Not to mention.
Yeah. So, I mean, the big discoveries have always almost slightly been, I don't want to say accident, right? I want to say the end product of an iterative journey. Uncovered. That's the word. They've always been uncovered while sort of studying something else or doing something else. And this is true in science, in innovation, in tech, in engineering, all of it, right? So, yeah, I don't know how the sort of, I had an idea and I built it and they came. I don't know how that came across, came along. But I think that's not reality.
I think that's also part of the whole romanticized rhetoric of the startup life. You know what I mean? We're just like, I was just sitting at home one day and you know what I mean? Like something like that. But like back to the YouTube thing, right? Like they were going down a completely different path, right? They were like, let's create a dating site where women can upload quick 30-second, I don't know how long, but quick videos about themselves. And so they do. And then they like soon find out that people are uploading different kinds of videos and using it for the purpose of uploading and sharing videos. And then they're like, wait a second here. And then boom, now you look at it and it's like, I think almost like every single piece of recorded history in the world is like available somewhere on YouTube. You couldn't watch all of YouTube in your entire life.
Yeah.
Not a chance. Not a chance with the amount of content.
Yeah.
These things, I think, just overall in terms of the startup journey, and especially with I think MVPs are a really kind of hot topic and perhaps a sore spot for people like you and me. But I think that the rhetoric and the idea, the highlight reel, if you will, of a startup journey from idea to funding and to huge IPO and all that kind of stuff is just so vastly different from the reality of it, the reality of that journey.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. The numbers kind of are skewed, right? Because who writes the history? Victor's blah blah, that thing.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right? It's the stories that survive, who are successful, that
the
we
winning
hear
stories.
about. Correct.
Yeah.
We don't really, it's just not in our purview the ones that didn't work, unless it was like a massive amazing failure.
Yeah.
Right. But the thing with the reason we push the MVP and we push people to almost make that commitment is to make that commitment to that action, but also to not be that number that's forgotten. Right? The journey to success really is breaking it down, validating your hypotheses and assumptions, acquiring your customers slowly, one at a time, starting with a crappy product, building on that. Really, the successful journey is that, and has been. So
yeah. Well, you heard it here first. Not really, but thanks so much for your time tonight, Rai.
Pleasure.
It's always such a wealth of experience, and you know what? Another thing that I think that I really appreciate in general, and that I know that is just valuable, is that you're so blunt about these things, and I think a lot of people wouldn't be perhaps as forthcoming, but I think for me, it's clear that your intent is really to set the person on the right path, right? In terms of iterating and looking for a true solution, and I mean, I think
it's funny you say that. No, I think it was yesterday.
You yelled at someone?
No, I didn't. But someone reminded me, one of our what do we call them? Our cohort people.
Alumni.
Yeah. I was speaking to one of our alumni, and they said, it's because of you that I'm here now, because I had 2 ideas when I joined the program, and you basically just shut me down and said, pick one. And I'm like, did I say that? Did you have 2 ideas? I completely forgot that. But you need to commit, you need to focus, and you need to take steps, not just think theoretically. So
yeah,
I now take the being blunt as a great compliment. Thank you.
It's so useful. I think it's underrated. Well, thanks for tuning in, and make sure to check out Rai's masterclass that she filmed with us on how to plan and build an MVP. See ya.